Okay.
Hello, Jocelyn. Hello, Arlene. Welcome, and to everybody else who's joining us on both Facebook and through our Zoom webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you've all grabbed your lunch and everybody's ready to go. We're going to be talking about coping hacks to manage our mental health in times of change and the challenges that come with change. So we have the fantastically interesting Jocelyn Rome and Arlene Bernstein joining us today. They are both long-time and very experienced counsellors. Jocelyn is our well-respected and much beloved head of people and culture here at Legal&Tax and Solace Benefits. And we've been very, very grateful to her for introducing us to Arlene Bernstein. So I'm going to hand over to Joss to tell us a little bit more about Arlene.
Okay, hi everybody. It's really wonderful to be talking to our members, and I hope that this will be a worthwhile lunch for you. And it's very nice for me, where a lot of my focus is on our staff and to actually talk to the people who use our services. So thanks for the opportunity for that. And what's really wonderful is to be able to talk about things that are important to all of us in our work life and in our home life. So one of the things that I talk a lot about at work is the kind of changing or liquid world we live in.
Yeah.
And how it creates challenges for us in coping with that. And what do I mean by a liquid world? It's things where the world doesn't really have a fixed shape or form anymore. The kind of old alliances that we were used to no longer exist. The kind of old way of organizing work, of organizing family, of organizing political parties, of organizing regional politics have all changed. And they take various forms, and it's part of the world that we live in, and what we're having to do is constantly adapt to these kinds of things, which we do. I mean, adaptation is not new in the world, but the rate which we're having to adapt is much quicker than it was. And in the work situation, those kind of adaptive challenges are really what leaders are focusing now, and what the leadership development challenges are about is how do you take people from a place where they are comfortable or a comfort zone and move them off that at a rate that they can tolerate towards a future where they can thrive. And that's what adaptation is. So that's where we talk about it in the workplace. But what happens when people actually get stuck? They get stuck with their own problems, their own lives and work problems, and they don't have the resources or wherewithal or whatever it is to actually do that kind of adaptation. And that's what I wanted to talk about, a bit about that stuckness and how we can get out of it. Maybe, Arlene, tell us a little bit about what you've seen in your practice and some of the stucknesses that you're working with and how people are getting, people use the word and getting around that. And is it different to what we saw before? Are people just talking about it more? Are the challenges different?
Thanks, Jocelyn. It's an excellent question, and probably one I have been asked it so many times in the last 100 years of my career. In a way, my life before private practice was as running Lifeline. I'm sure people saw it in the bio. And Lifeline was a crisis organization, and set up to be a crisis organization for people in deep distress. There was always somewhere that you could call, or you could, in later years, could come in and see a counsellor and get some help because life was a crisis. And in those days, I would often be asked, usually it's kind of end of the year, Christmas time or January, are people more stressed now than ever? Is suicide really bad? Are relationships really bad? And I'd always say it's pretty much the same as it's always been. We just have so much more to deal with than we did years and years ago. So the essential things of stuckness, I think, are as old as mankind, to be honest. I think, and I will always say, at the root of it is relationship. It's a relationship, and it starts with a relationship with ourselves at the core, and then relationships with others and the world. And I see I'm using my hands even when I talk on a webinar. I'm going to try and sit on them.
Okay. If you're anything like me, you won't be able to talk.
Honestly, I'm going to see if I can speak, because here they're going. Okay. So what sticks people is usually, as I say, is a relationship and the feeling that we should be doing things, or the shoulds in life, like we should or we shouldn't, those kind of things are there always. I do think we need to talk today with the context of COVID and lockdown in our minds, because I do think has had a unique effects on people's coping and functioning. It definitely has. But
and I think about that. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think that and I'm sure you'll get to it, post-COVID, people are just bringing a lot of trauma that was pent up during lockdown and those kinds of things?
Absolutely. And I talk for myself. I remember having moments in the course of 2020 and even last year, and sometimes this year, saying I dream of April 2020 is my dream. And I used to know, why do I dream of it? And there people were posting empty highways, and the canals in Venice that were clean. There is a lot of noise. Is there any way of?
Don't worry, it's not coming through. It's not coming through.
Oh, okay, good. I hear it, but I'm not sure where. Okay, so that enormous, peaceful, kind of blissful time before we thought that life, we almost this euphoric feeling that we were going to have a better world, until we realized this was here to stay and it wasn't going to be so much better.
Yeah.
So post-COVID, your question really was, what was your question, Jocelyn?
Yeah, are people bringing more? Yeah.
Yes. So I think why I think it's worse now than it was any time during COVID or after it, is because there is now the assumption and the expectation that life resumes back to normal. That's what's happened, and I think all those things that the world will change and we'll deal with each other in a kinder, more respectful way, or we'll slow down and we'll smell the roses more. I think that's all evaporated. We've gone back to full scale, full on work pressures, demands, family, but we come back to it now, I think, with less resources. The resources of trauma, you use the word trauma, and I completely endorse that. we're a traumatized country at the moment because of what we're living with. People are traumatized. And trauma, I'm using trauma a little bit loosely because, academically it's life or death trauma, but I think people feel like they are living on the edge. When your basic I'm going to put everything right now in the context of electricity that isn't certain, water that's not certain. These are our basic needs. They're basic needs for people. And when those are interfered with, everything feels out of control to a degree. So I call it like the wallpaper on our computer. Life goes on, but when it slows down and your computer goes back into waiting mode, what comes up, and I think that's it. It's the mindset. Most people are getting on with it because most people are resilient.
Yeah.
Most people function.
I'd actually like to ask you. Sorry, I need to interrupt.
I think
I think one of the things that for a lot of us, whether we've come back to work or whether we're working home or whatever the situation is that there's this feeling that how we used to cope and how we used to manage just isn't working. It's like a t-shirt that doesn't fit anymore, or shoes that are no longer lacing up. Like there's just something that has changed, and we as human beings, we try to manage and we try to come up with these ways to cope, but nothing seems to be, not necessarily, there's a popular song on the radio and it's like, you're not really happy, but you don't want to die.
Exactly.
It's just things are not 100%. And I think for most of us, and I think for a lot of the people who've joined the webinar, it's about like, well, I'm doing everything right. Why am I not 100%? And it's not easy to admit, I think, for a lot of us to say, well, I've been through trauma, or or even I haven't been through what other people consider trauma, but I feel like I'm at the end of my rope, I'm exhausted, I can't get my stuff together. And then you go, well, what do? I don't feel like I could go and see a medical professional because I don't feel like I'm losing my mind. Where do we go?
Why is it that little things seem to push me over the edge?
Yeah,
exactly.
Why do I want to strangle the people in front of me when they cut me off with lights? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a heightened level of anxiety, I think, that we're living with. I think often how it's showing up for a lot of people is physically, because it's hard to name this. So it's easier, and our bodies will do the work if we don't do the other work. And it shows up in physical symptoms. So people have got all kinds of things happening to them that they're going to, all kinds of medical professionals, because you need, the quest is to get some kind of support from somewhere. And we start with what we know or what feels safest. And sadly, I mean, you're spot on, Caitlin. I think that it's an indefinable kind of difference. You can't quite see it, but we feel it. Everybody feels it in different ways. And because mental health and mental wellness and our mental health is still sits in that realm of stigma to a degree. It's not easy to see it, that it doesn't get recognized. And so if you're in a corporate, or you're in a working environment in which it's okay to say, I need a mental health day, or you don't have to fabricate an illness. You could actually say, I can't cope, I just need a breather. Which very few companies allow. But if you were in a situation like this, we could actually just take some time to breathe. But it's not an easy one. The first thing that is what you said, is to kind of identify, I'm not right. My relationship isn't right. I just feel like if you had to talk about it, it's like there's not so much harmony in the tune.
Exactly. Something's off
out
key.
Of tune a bit.
Exactly. I think it can be very difficult when you've got a situation like we do now, post-pandemic, and a lot of people are like, the critical mass has been reached. People don't want to hear about COVID anymore. We're all kind of like, we don't want to talk about this. We don't want to deal with wearing masks. We don't want to hear about this. But at the same time, there is the necessity that we have to deal with it, and we have to examine. See, it's my turn, bands. We have to look at it and go, right, this is difficult. I feel rough, or I feel like something is out of my control. And number one, it's not my fault. I'm doing my best. And number two, how do I make this better? And I think that's that relationship with yourself, as well as your significant other, or co-workers, parents, friends, family, etc. We do have a question. I'm going to actually ask, if we don't mind.
To try and find out where this noise is.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Joss.
Okay.
I'm going to ask all our wonderful attendees, if you would please perhaps then put the questions that you have in the chat. It's just going to be a little bit easier to monitor, because then I can see your questions and I can either address them directly, and with the noise, it might just be easier for us to read out questions. So, but Arlene, thank you so much. It's already started out to be incredibly interesting. And of course, we are talking coping hacks. So would you like to start off on our roller coaster of things that we can learn, things that we can take home, and then why you think that these things are going to be important to us?
Okay. So I think the first thing for me that we tend to do in a place where we feel helpless, and when we feel helpless, we tend to want someone to be responsible for our helplessness. So I kind of say it's like, what we do is we point, like, kind of do it upwards, like, so it might be, why God, or why universe, or why are you doing this to me? Why is this going on? What's happening here? Or we tend to point our fingers outward, like to the world. So we go, the government, look at the mess, look at the corruption, look at everything else. We put it out there. Or we might even put, look downwards and we go, well, it's the devil, or it's conspiracy, or it's there's a million things we say about why things happen to us, and why we're not coping. So I say, while the one finger's going up and the other fingers are going out, and some are going down, and now you've got 15 fingers, there's not too much. There needs to be a finger that points back to us. And so the first important thing I think of anything, and I think it's a universal, it informs all my work. It's informed all my work forever, which is there's good reason to be looking outwards. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but at the end of the day, the only thing we can control is ourselves. The only thing we can look at and look at in all of it is us. So instead of the blame game, and I'm not saying we don't hold people accountable and do all that stuff, but instead of sitting in that place, we look, I say, invite it in and say, so what can I do about whatever? What can I take responsibility for? So the finger that points inwards is just to me. How do I survive this? You know, I was saying just the other day about load shedding. I said, you know, the anger about load, and I raise it because it feels it's such an invasive thing that's happened to us, and I do think it's a collective trauma. And that doesn't talk to the fact that many people in our country have had no electricity for many years and have adapted and maybe have lessons to learn. But what I do think in it is that the longer we don't, you know, and so I'm saying with load shedding, it used to be quite nice a while ago to be able to say, sorry, I couldn't do that, you know, the traffic was terrible, and sorry, I can't come because, you know, I've got no lights. And it was a little bit of an out, and we all were in the same boat. But it's become less acceptable to do that now, because actually we can do some things to sort it out. You can put you can have a power bank right next to your thing so your phone never runs out if you remember to charge the power bank. And you can, if you have the means, you can do various things. We can get emergency lights. You don't have to sit in the dark. You can plan. It's no longer to use the things that we blame for as reasons to not be productive or not cope or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's that's the first thing. I say, look, take it on. It's actually by taking something on, taking responsibility, and for anything in our world. Something happens to me, what was my part in it? What did I have to do with it? Just gives us more choice of ownership and more choice of doing something about it. Because otherwise we blame, and then, well, if they don't do anything about it, I'm stuck. There it goes back to just stuck. I'm stuck.
Not doing anything. So what steps can people really start on their taking responsibility journey?
Okay.
So we call this hack one. This is coping hack number one.
You keep count of the hacks. Keep count. There's a lovely story. There's a lovely story about two men. I call them Mo and Joe, and they worked in an abattoir with the carcasses of that was their job. They worked in an abattoir from Monday to Friday, and at the end of their working day, they would take what was left over of the carcasses and put them in this deep freeze, like this huge big deep freeze. It was Friday afternoon, the last run they had of the week, and they both walked into the deep freeze carrying these heavy carcasses on their back. And they went into the deep freeze, and they somehow or other, some inadvertent, something happened, and the door closed behind them. And they were both now they know they're there till Monday, because no one's coming. There's no alarm system from inside. This is it. They've got 2 days, and they're going to make a decision. So I would do this as an ask and answer, but I won't. I'll tell you. So Mo says to Joe, "Don't just sit there and mope. We're not. You know, you've got choices." And there was a deep freeze full of carcasses. So Mo started moving the one carcass from one side of the freezer. He got up and he walked and he put it on the other side. And then he got up and he walked and he put it on the other side. And he did that from Friday night and all day Saturday and all day Sunday. And Sunday, the early hours of Monday morning, he's still walking. The walking has got slower, but he never stopped. Joe, on the other hand, said, "It's futile. It's pointless. I can't, this is ridiculous, woe, this is the most terrible thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. And what do you think happened on Monday morning when they opened the freezer?
Was one of them frozen?
Okay. So
Mo is still moving.
Exactly. So there was Mo standing there, with, you know, hypothermic and not a well man, but he was standing. He was standing, and Joe was set in ice. He had frozen. And I think it's an analogy for, so what's our steps? The steps is to look and say, do I stop and wait and say, I cannot, this is a pointless, big, it's too big for me, I can't act, everything conspires against me? Or do I make little steps that even in the making of those steps, they feel fairly meaningless sometimes? All I'm doing is moving something from one side to the other side. But in the moving of the doing of something, I choose life. I choose to survive. I choose to commit to something, whether it's, and I think that's what I'm talking about. From ownership comes a decision to commit to something, which is the very first step.
Just committing to a process, and you're not committing to an outcome because it's uncertain.
Exactly. I don't know where this is going to take me, but I'm also saying I'm not waiting. I mean, there's so many variations of a theme on this for you know, young people who are waiting to find their, you know, their Mr. Right, or that wonderful story about the flood. I'm sorry if I'm flooding you with stories about flooding, but that story about there was terrible floods and a man's was there, that everything was drowning, and somebody knocked on the door of this man's house and said, come, I've got a car, come with me before we you know, you drown. He said, no, I believe in God is going to save me. Next thing, the water levels are higher, and that's up, and they're near the window, and a boat comes by, because now the boats are kind of floating by, and a guy, he knocks on the door, come with me, yeah, come and get in the boat. No, I've believed in God. I've been a religious person all my life. God will save me. And next thing, a helicopter comes. They drop down a rope, and they says, come, the water, you're going to drown. Come with a rope. And he says, no, I believe in God. God is going to help me. Well, unfortunately, the water comes over his head. He doesn't make it, and off he is up to heaven. And he meets St. Peter, or whoever meets you when you come to heaven. I don't know personally, but whoever meets you. And he says, but God, you forsook me in my moment of desperation. Why? I've believed in you. I've waited. I've been devoted. I've been religious. Why did you not save me? He said, I sent a car. I sent a boat. I sent a helicopter. What more? we need to see the possibility when we're looking for it in other ways, and when we're very stuck in our spaces, we sometimes can't see what's coming at us as opportunity. And it's hard sometimes to see that.
Well, I'd say, if you don't mind, I'm going to just summarize that as coping hack 1. I'd say we can call that there's power in process. And that it is something that if one is kind of stuck and it feels like one is up against the wall and you just can't find a way out, that to start that process and to just start making those small steps allows you to feel like you have some degree of control and to take ownership of it. And that'll help you. And listen to us all, everybody. Coping hack number 1 is very much choices. It's making those choices, and it's exerting the control in order to make those choices. Sorry, Jocelyn, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, so that sums it up very well. So now my next question is, what do we do with someone in our life? How do we be a companion where we walk with someone making those choices? What do we do for someone with mental health? We're not mental health professionals. So yes, we do have to help ourselves, but at what point do we say, listen, we need help here?
Okay, it's such a, probably it's such an important thing, because if, this talks to, if I take responsibility for myself, I do what I can do, and that kind of is an empowering kind of place. But the place we feel we can, as just frail human beings, is feel most helpless with the people that are in our lives that don't take responsibility for their lives, or can't, not even don't, but just can't, because they either really, when I say in deep despair and symptomatic, and they are depressed and not able to function, or they're helpless and not able to they're helpless and not able to act or do anything in the world. And it's a very fine line. In all my years at Lifeline, when it was a telephone counselling service, they used to get something we always called the third party caller, the person that phoned on behalf of the other person. And it wasn't like the days where you phoned and said, I'm phoning about my friend who's got a boyfriend and it's really you.
Yeah.
It really was somebody saying, what do I do about my son? Or what do I do about my neighbor? What do I do about somebody?
Yeah.
Because the helplessness that's evoked from somebody else that we love's helplessness it's a very painful place. And the only thing I know, as and I say, is that as adults, we cannot tell another adult how to behave. We don't have the right, really, but we're also very rarely successful at it, because no adult wants to be told what to do. We can't tell them what to do. We have a right, and we should do that with children, our children, and children we may be responsible for. We have to. But adults, it's more difficult. So all we can do is be that. You use the word, how can you be empathic? What can you do to support? We can tell the people in our lives, we can show them, we can stand up, we can be present, and we can kind of just, try to walk the road with them without telling them how they ought to be doing it.
Yeah.
Which is a hard way.
Sometimes. For many of us, we have an innate need to rescue people.
Exactly.
How do we maintain that boundary between thinking they need saving and actually walking with them in an enabling way for them?
Well, the famous example of what's the difference between sympathy and empathy. So like when we deeply sympathize with a person who's drowning, let's say there's somebody drowning in the sea, and we look and we go, oh, you're drowning in the sea, that's too terrible. Let me jump in and rescue you. Okay. So I jump in and I rescue you. I didn't check that I kind of not the best swimmer in the whole wide world, but I may not, but my deep desire to save you meant that I jumped in with you. Okay, and then at that point, we put both our lives at risk, because I'm not going to be any more competent to necessarily rescue you from that water. But so that would be sympathy. That would be saying, I feel so much for you. I want to save you, but in the meantime, I'm going to, make it all about me, and I might in fact do a really bad job, and neither of us will survive. The other option is, how do I save you while at the same time save myself? And I don't mean that in a selfish way. I mean, how do I do it so that I can give you the best, but I actually stand out of it and do it? So I might say, if I've got the opportunity to, I will throw in a buoy or a lilo or a pool noodle, whatever it might be. I'll throw something in that you can hold on to, and I will try to myself or get help so that we can pull you out. But jumping in to save somebody, which we see in the movies all the time, and they always do a perfect rescue, and they always spoil my example. But the truth of it is that with family members or in relationships, we cannot prevent the other person from taking the steps in their journey. We can tell them that if they did that, this would make me absolutely petrified and devastated, and I'm scared for them. And I hope you know that those are the consequences. And if you did that, that's what happens to me in fear. And they will say, if you matter enough to me, I will take what you say into an account. And it doesn't mean that they don't take you into account, that you don't matter to them, but sometimes people are too far into their own miseries. It's often the story of suicide, you know, and I say that as the extremist of the examples, where in that moment, a person does not believe that anybody really cares and loves them in the way they need to be. So they don't actually believe, really internalize inside them that they will be a loss to anybody. They know they will be intellectually, but they don't believe it, really. And if we can have relationships with people that they know, they matter, you matter to me, I'm there for you, what you do affects me, what I do affects you, I hope we can be more accountable, and we can try to be with people in a more accountable way, you know, in an ideal world.
Can we call that coping hack number 2?
Yes.
Which is that?
The kindness, the consequences, and accountability. I think that is something that is, in fact, that's a group of things that are incredibly important when we think about how we interact with the rest of the world, whether it is our immediate friendship circle or our colleagues. There's always a level of strain, and that when we are honest about how something affects us and are able to share that in a way where we don't feel judged, but that somebody is listening. And in fact, our article this month that was in support of Mental Health Awareness Month, that is October, is that it is titled "The Silence Around Suicide," and the fact that we don't talk about it. And it is an incredibly difficult subject for a lot of people, whether through personal experience or just through the fact that it is still a very stigmatized and not well acknowledged topic. So I think that it's very important that we always remember that there is kindness in those kind of sharing of consequences. It's that being aware of the fact that you do need to make other people aware of how you feel, and that there is that accountability builds a relationship.
That drowning with them isn't
drowning with them is not going to help. So that's always the thing to think about, you know. So as I say, when those third-party people would call and they would say, "What must I do?" Our counselling was always to that person. So I would say they're phoning on behalf of somebody else, but we need to hear what's going on for them. Because why does the fate of your best friend or the mess of your neighbor or something else plague you to the point of not being able to settle? And I would perhaps overgeneralize if I said something of what's going on for them is happening inside us at the same time, or you know. So why does that person take it on so much? Why do we want to rescue? We rescue because the story resonates inside us in some way. We feel alone. We don't want the other person to feel alone. So if in that moment we can hear, "Gosh, you feel alone," does that help, you know? And sometimes that, you know, I always said it was the most successful thing when somebody phoned about someone else, is worried about someone else, and they ended up talking about themselves. Then I go, okay, we've done what's right here, and that's also the people who are judgmental about other people's behavior. You know, think about all the judgments we live with. You know, look at her, look what she's doing. Can you believe? Look, who doesn't love a good gossip? I mean, we all do. You know, we want it, but when we're doing it at the expense of other people, we have to understand what is it about them. And often underneath gossip like that or judgments like that is envy. You know, it's like, I wish I could do it. I wish I could be so brave as to find somebody 20 years younger than me. See? You know, or something like that, you know, whatever it might be. But it's complex. I think what we want to understand is that motives in this whole, the other thing to say for me about mental health is I had a very, very close friend and colleague. She passed away, but before she passed away from cancer, she had depression, but like she had she used to call it the she called it her dark ghost, I think. She had really bad depression for about 20 years. She tried to function through it, but she really, really struggled. And she gave me one of my life lessons, because she contracted cancer and she was sick for years. She was also sick for years. And she said to me one day that one day with her depression was worse than her worst day with cancer. She said because when she was diagnosed with cancer, people rallied round. She said she had support. She had phone calls from all kinds of people. There were offers of lifts. There was always some food for her. There was always a meal or something. She always had somebody to call and talk to, or somebody checked in on her. She said 20 years of depression was like this weight to bear that nobody ever gave her the time of day for, and in fact judged her quite badly for it. And I'd never forget her for the fact that she said that's the time when you need the help, when you actually are so deeply in your own space of despair, but you look fine. You look
not
fine.
waving but drowning.
It's a very hard line for people to say, the line between back up, pull yourself together, or let me fix you. And I think that's we have to learn to negotiate. And maybe the way, what your hack 2 is about kindness, it's about empathy, it's about walking with people, but ultimately they have to be able to take the decisions themselves.
Yeah. Well, you can't pour from an empty cup.
No.
Yeah.
But just know that you're sometimes walking next to someone and how much it matters.
Exactly. Just before this webinar now, I saw a client of mine in my private practice, and she has a family member going through quite a hectic court procedure at the moment. Whatever, and she's her family member's a very coping person, but she wanted to know how to support her without making her feel like she was not coping. So she said, because if she sends her a message every day to say, how are you doing? And are you okay? She thinks that she keeps just writing, fine, all good, fine. And it's not, it doesn't feel like she's being of any help. So we talked about it and kind of came up with the idea that she would make a WhatsApp group. And she would call it something like try for a lighter touch, like some like court madness, I don't know what, something. And she would post things into this group that just talked about, I know that's where you are. I know that's what you're doing. I'm not necessarily, and I think that's another, perhaps a hack or not a hack. I think people are very afraid of people who are going through something, somehow not to offend or not to say the wrong thing, or how do you support with, in what way? And if someone had bad news, do you walk in and say, I believe, you've got all this terrible thing happening? And sometimes support, I call it holding the space. So if you make a group, a WhatsApp group, you just make a space, and I mean, you make a space to deposit things into. And it's the same as if you're having an operation and your family are waiting outside while you're inside the hospital, and they go, you don't have to wait. You can go and do what you want, but we feel sometimes we want to wait there because we want to hold the space that says, this is what's happening now. I don't want to do anything else in this time. I want to be in the space with you. And we need to hold the space for people without necessarily saying words of, I'm so devastated to hear. Sometimes you just need to send a little, it could be a light thing, but I'm here remembering your space.
Yeah.
That's all.
Actually, WhatsApp groups can work very well, because what it does, it pulls other people who maybe you don't want to have that deep conversation, but actually want to be in that space too.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I think incognito caring is probably hack 3.
Okay.
The fact that there are, it's something that's very difficult for a lot of people to admit that they need help.
You're a marketing genius, Caitlin.
Thank you. I think my general manager's listening. Please feel free to say that again.
Incognito. Absolutely.
Incognito caring.
In all seriousness, there are so many of us, and I'm afraid for many of us, it's our men, it's our male friends, it's our people who've always been expected to just manage. Like, you must just be fine. Like, at no point are you allowed to turn around and say, actually, I need a hand, I need help. And for it to not feel like that then reflects on their entire self-identity, like all of their self-worth is now completely and utterly wrapped up in the fact that they have made this crisis admission that now they actually need some help, small amount of help.
Exactly.
And, we also see it in cultural situations where people feel it's not, and you mentioned men. I mean, I don't think it's only men. I think
it's everyone.
But for many men, it's very difficult to admit you're not coping, or it's sometimes seen as unmanly. So what could we, even as a company, do to create spaces where people feel safe and comfortable to actually just say, I need a hand? That's another long webinar.
Yeah,
it is, but I think just naming it right now is a very important thing, because I'm hoping there are men listening to us who will look and go, I feel so overwhelmed. I mean, I know in my practice and with some of my colleagues, it used to be, and it's a bit of a very big generalization, but in the days of old, if you thought of kind of libido and people wanting to be intimate, it always was the woman's got the headache, she doesn't want to. But now I cannot tell you, it's about men saying, leave me alone, I'm too tired, I'm too stressed, I'm so anxious that I will not be able to perform. It's showing up at that level, so it shows up physically in that way, and that there's a very kind of I think there's an element of embarrassment and shame that gets attached to that a little bit. So if we just name it, and there's easy things to fix those things, they're not deal breakers at all, but the level of tension and pressure by the time people get home into their relaxed time, I actually think it could possibly be the worst time for them. It's, you come back and you're kind of so pent up with all the things that you're having to do and deliver and whatever, that the time that you now have an expectation, if there's a partner or a spouse or whatever in your life, suddenly you have to show up for them and there's no energy. So what can you do? I think exactly what you've just done, which is actually make it feel okay for someone to say, I hope men, but everybody, things are not fitting right. I need to talk it through so that I can just realign.
I think that's the strength in being flexible almost with one's relationship with oneself, because I think people always assume that if someone's really hard, that they're really strong. But they're not, they're brittle, and that's when things crack. And that flexibility is so important.
That's, it's a life lesson for coping with challenges, but also at work. I mean, what stops us from adapting?
Yes.
It's patterns we learn from whenever. This is how things are done, and maybe the way to address that are those your hacks. It's responsibility. How do I take responsibility for myself? How do I walk next to someone? And what is do we have it?
We had incognito caring as hack 3.
Incognito
caring, but sometimes it needs to be cognito.
Caring,
Sometimes people have to show up.
Yeah, sometimes it needs the billboard and the neon sign.
Exactly.
The incognito caring can also create an environment where people feel they can.
Yes.
That's the value there.
Exactly. So they can do that. And then I think, spoke a bit about choice. So, so just to reinforce that message, perhaps, Viktor Frankl. Some people will know him really well.
I was thinking that, yeah.
Okay. So anybody who doesn't, please put in the questions and we'll say more about it. But
Arlene, maybe just give a quick
background.
2-second background of who he was.
So Viktor Frankl was a psychoanalyst, actually, a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, who was in a concentration camp in the Holocaust. And he formed the theory that he then took out, and he survived the war, and those terrible years. And he formed a theory that then has become well regarded, well known, and it forms the foundation of so much thinking in modern in our world today. But he said, where is there a situation in your life where you have absolutely no choice at all, that you have no control and no power over your life? Well, it was in a concentration camp, where you did not know if your turn to be called to the gas chamber was going to be the next day, or you're going to lose the person next to you. You had no choice. But he observed and watched people, and he saw that the people who never gave up the choice in their mind. So what that was is, I've got no choice whether I'm going to live or die, but I have a choice about how I'm going to feel about that. I have a choice. Nobody controls my thoughts. Nobody controls the way I manage my thought and what action I take about that thought process. So in a simple, he says it very beautifully, I'll praise it. He says, between the stimulus, whatever the stimulus in our life is, and the response we have to it, whatever it might be, between the stimulus and the response is our freedom, there's a space between it. So before I even finish that sentence, let me give you an example of walking in the hypermarket or Pick and Pay or Checkers or whatever, and you're walking innocently along and somebody bashes the trolley into the back of your foot. And they bash into it. And I don't know what you would do, but I think most people's spontaneous reaction is to get very irritated and want to swear, like what happened here? It's a knee-jerk response of a bash. But what happens generally, in 99% of the cases, you turn around or you look at the source of it and you see somebody who looks sorry. Their face looks sorry, and they never say, they don't even have to say anything. They go, oh, and that rage that welled up inside you that you could have actually bashed something dies down immediately. It immediately goes. It doesn't last, because we had a response to what we did, and we then had a choice of how to react in what happens. That's often the context for road rage, by the way, because what happens in road rage is you're driving in your car and someone does something, but you can't see that they're sorry. You can't see that they regret it. So that's where it grows. If somebody puts up their hand and they go, sorry, I never meant to cut you off, or I didn't, it goes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, my face changes only because I hear noise, but otherwise, if you can hear me, I'm fine. Okay.
So that is about, we do have a choice in how we respond. We may not have a choice in what happens to us.
No, exactly.
How we respond to conflict, exactly. Whatever it is, yeah.
Exactly. So that the fine line, like Mo and Joe did, what we say is that in between the stimulus, whatever it might be. So you're saying whatever it might be in our lives, it might be, the stimulus might be the familiar words that come from our boss. The boss says something in a certain tone, and the response, that's it. You're already in a place of, I feel undervalued, and look what happens, and there's a predictable response. What we want to say is that we have the freedom to choose that response, and we can adapt it, and that's our power. So our power is in that. What is the quality of the choices we make about what's happening to us? And there's a lot of things that people feel completely helpless about, like we've said, but actually they've got much more choice than they realize.
We have a question.
Before we sum up, there is a question there. Do you want to take it, Caitlin?
Sure. Lizelle Pienza has asked, at work, everyone is always told to go to HR for whatever, but where do we, HR, go when things get too much for us within a team of one?
It's a great question, Liesel. I often talk about the HR cupboard and what goes in there and doesn't come out. Maybe, Arlene, you and very often HR is just one person.
Yeah.
And the difficulties you have are that people come to you with their problems, and they sit with you, and what do you do with them, and how do they leave you? So maybe Arlene's words on that.
Okay, so Liesl, I think I'm hoping one of the things you're doing is listening into this webinar, because that would be one of the things to do, which is to kind of almost find sources of support that actually make you feel not crazy. Okay, so you kind of hear other people dealing with things and you go, okay, that's one of the ways. But in a place where you are a team of one, if there's anybody like-minded on your same managerial level that you can kind of have a mentorship relationship with within the company, that you feel you could talk to without betraying confidences. The truth is, in HR, you hold confidences that you can't share, and so what I say, and I do lots of, and I'm not talking about me, but what I'd say is, see if you can get some mentorship from outside, somewhere that you can debrief if you need to. That's usually a good idea, and in a team of one, an essential idea. And maybe that's something here in terms of offering a space for different kinds of people to just chat. You can really sometimes only chat to a colleague not in the system. Because otherwise it's too career limiting if you talk to people within the company.
Nicely put.
Very interesting thought.
Yeah. So whatever it is, we're kind of looking at, whether it's coming home and watching like a really fabulous, super indulgent series on Netflix with a chocolate, whatever it is to do self-nurturing for combating against the anxieties that you weather in the day. That's what we need to do. So some things are what do I need to do? What do I identify works for me? What works for me that I can actually do some self-care? So maybe that's where we kind of go in terms of ending this. At the end of the day, in terms of coping with anything that life's got, take responsibility, investigate your choices, support others and ask for support. So that incognito care is also asking for what you need, if you can. Or firstly, it's just identifying that you feel that it's not right, that things feel strange. And if that's all that people take out of today, that it's actually quite acceptable, quite normal, quite natural to be feeling out of sorts in the world right now, that would be a really good thing. Really.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. And Joss, would you like to do a sum up? And I'll do the goodbyes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard a lot, and I think it's been I really love this forum of maybe, I'm not sure who's on the webinar, but I would like to know, and maybe there are ways
we've got some colleagues and some clients.
HR, I mean, we all have the same issues. And not only in HR, I think line managers also hold a lot of stuff that people have. So that's the one thing, and that is find colleagues, find mentors, find webinars, find outside places where you can debrief, and I think that's really important. But just to sum up on the sort of life hacks, and we know that we've been quite ironic because we're not reducing the real challenges people have to hacks, but it's just something quite nice to package and take away. And I think, Caitlin, you're probably better at that than me, but if I think of what we've really spoken about today, it's about taking responsibility for our own mental health, our own response to challenges. We have choices, and what kind of choices do we make? And we're not saying this is easy, but your first step is saying the first way to be better is me. Then the second one is how do you help someone? And that's really walk with them, share kindness, and be empathetic. And you don't have to dive into the swirling waters with them. Which is, I mean, my first response to your story, Arlene, is I'm in the pool.
Okay.
Actually, one has to think about what is the most helpful way. And I think a similar story is for those that have been on an airplane, where they tell you in the beginning, when the oxygen mask falls, you don't give it to your child, actually, which is our first instinct.
On yourself.
So breathing. I mean, we spoke a lot about breathing, and the first step to taking responsibility and breathing yourself is that, and then also making sure that you can breathe before you can help someone else.
Yeah.
And then it is about the choices we make and consciously care, or whether it's present or incognito. I mean, that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, I think in the end, it was never going to be easy, and it never will be, but accept that it doesn't always have to be this hard.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a lovely way.
Realize that it is hard.
Mm.
You know, that, you know, everyone is, not everyone, you know, is having this wonderful time.
Yeah,
I think the opening line of that iconic book, the road less traveled, eh? The road less traveled. Who said life should be easy? Who said it? You know, where did we? And I think that's already. At the end of the day, I'll say that, you know, I'm grateful, and I think people find life easier if they have a temperament that actually allows you to be more fluid and go with the flow. But even for people with those temperaments, life is tough. Okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are all incredibly resilient. And that's what we have to celebrate, and just
and resilience is another webinar, and that's a wonderful one. Okay.
You're giving me all sorts of ideas for the next ones.
Okay. Thank you all.
I want to say thank you so much to everybody who joined us. It is now a few minutes to 2, and I just wanted to say thank you to the attendees who stuck with us for an hour, and thank you extra much. That's now a phrase, we're coining things in this webinar. To Jocelyn and to Arlene for your just exceptional wisdom and a great deal of very caring advice. I think a lot of the time we hear the buck up and that's fine, get over it. But thank you so much for taking the time, both of you, to give us the kind of advice that we actually really need to hear in order to make things better over time.
Thanks.
So I'm now going to be.
Thanks.
Does anybody want to say any closing goodbyes? You have 2 minutes before Zoom kicks us out.
Thank you all for coming, and I hope it's, you know, if you can take one bit of something from this, then we hope your time is well spent.
Yeah. I think we're all. Oh, sorry, Arlene.
No. I'm talked out. I've said it all.
Excellent. Thank you so much to everybody, and we hope that you guys are all able to take away from this something that is going to resonate with you, and something or some things that will stay with you, that you can use and that you find useful, and hopefully that you can share with other people. And I think that there is a great deal of value in sharing the things that we learn from, the things that make us happy, and even the things that make us sad with other people and the people around us. So please feel free to go do that. Our lunch is over. We're going to head off back to our desks. We hope everybody has a wonderful day and travel safe. Cheerio.
Thank you.